And the hobble or maximal restraint technique also requires supervisory reporting, is that right?
It does.
If you would highlight section Roman 4:3. And you can see here by policy that a supervisor shall be called to the scene where a subject has been restrained using the MRT or hobble. Is that right?
Yes.
And then as a supervisor, you would have to go and evaluate whether the hobble was properly and necessarily used. Is that right?
Yes.
And then if you could highlight section B on that same page. After a hobble is used on an individual, and typically when a hobble is used, it means that the person has been placed in a prone position. Is that right?
That's correct.
At least initially to get the hobble on.
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what the prone position is?
Basically flat on your stomach on the ground.
Okay. Once a hobble is used to restrain the hands and the feet and the subject is in the prone position, what does the policy require an officer to do?
Put them in the side recovery position.
What is the side recovery position?
Basically roll them up on their side to ease their breathing rather than leave them laying on their stomach or chest.
And do you know why that's important?
It helps them breathe better. Rather than having all the weight on their chest, it gets them up on their side so they can breathe easier.
Are you familiar with the term positional asphyxia?
Yes.
Now, how are you familiar with that term?
We've had it in training at MPD.
How long have you personally been aware of positional asphyxia?
A lot of years, 10, 15.
And based on your experience as a Minneapolis police officer, are the dangers of positional asphyxia generally known throughout the department?
Yes, I believe so.
That's something that officers are trained on?
Correct.
Okay. And when we talk about positional asphyxia, just at a high level, could you explain what positional asphyxia is, as you've been trained?
If you restrain somebody or leave them on their chest and stomach for too long, their breathing can become compromised, and so you'd want to get them up out of that position after a while so they don't suffer breathing complications.
And that's why the policy requires in the training is that you roll someone onto the side recovery position.
Yes.
And are you aware of whether or not people are allowed to be transported in the prone position, restrained?
I believe they should be transported in the recovery position.
And when you talk about the need to roll someone into the recovery position to alleviate breathing, you're just talking about a situation where the pressure is from the subject's own body weight. Is that right?
That could be, yes.
That does not necessarily include additional pressure that might be applied.
Correct.
So the danger is there without anyone pressing down on them.
Yes.
You could take that down, please. Were you working as a sergeant supervisor in the 3rd Precinct on in May of 2020?
Yes.
And at that time, what were your duties as a patrol sergeant?
As I explained before, report approval, monitor the shift for the night, roll call, any use of force reporting.
And again, you were working the mid-watch shift, is that right?
Yes.
And May 25, 2020, were you also working as a shift sergeant?
I was.
Oh, I'm going to ask you if you're familiar with an individual named Derek Chauvin.
I am.
Chauvin, I apologize. Derek Chauvin. How are you familiar with this person?
He was an officer on my shift.
How long have you known him?
Probably since around 2008.
So he was already working as an officer when you were hired?
I don't think he was when I was hired, but eventually he was on my shift, yes.
He was on your shift?
Correct.
Okay. And do you recognize Mr. Chauvin in the courtroom today?
I do.
Would you please point to him?
Right there.
May the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant. Could you please just describe your relationship with Mr. Chauvin?
He was an officer on middle watch with me, I'm going to say approximately 2008. So he'd been there a number of years, so I was supervised there.
It was strictly a working relationship?
Correct.
You ever socialized with him outside of a work setting?
No,
You familiar with an individual named Tu Tao?
I am.